Hello and welcome to the semi-finals of Grand Prix Lille. We can see some big smiles on the faces of these players that have made it through to the final four. Christopher Larsen on Golgari mid-range is playing against Gabriel Nassif with mono blue tempo. Nassif, one of the very few players even to make it through to day two with mono blue tempo. Not very many of them in the field, but it's been serving him well the entire weekend long. If he can get an early Tempest Yin down, if he can get an early Curious Obsession and then start protecting his key threats with counter magic, he could walk away with this game. But if Christopher Larsen gets to a mid or a late game, his deck has a lot of staying power.
Yeah, mono blue tempo, one of these decks that looks easy to play on paper, but then you start playing it and it's actually quite a hard deck to pilot, because Tempest Djinn and Curious Obsession are your strongest cards, and you just need to make sure that these cards stick onto the table. You can't run them out too early. You have to protect them with Dive Down and Spell Pierce, and some people, they take some time to master.
Now, for Christopher Larsen, he's already played a Wild Growth Walker, and depending on how his draw has lined up, that could be a bit of a problem for Gabriel Nassif, because each and every time that he explores from now on, Christopher Larsen will be making that Wild Growth Walker bigger. He will also be gaining 3 life at a time. Here we see Merfolk Branch Walker. That will be one of the ways that he can achieve exactly that. And each time that he's gaining 3 life, that is providing a lot of extra damage that Gabriel Nassif needs to find a way of dealing. This could be a problematic start for Gabriel Nassif to work his way through, as he's kicked things off with just a couple of copies of Mistcloaked Herald that, while they're not blockable, they are not exactly great blockers.
No. They kind of have to raise, but yes, as you say, 3 life every time. Christopher Larsen up to 22. Earlier in the day, Simon Gertsen was making the point that Wild Growth Walker was not that good against mono blue tempo, but I don't actually agree. I think in the games where you don't have Curious Obsession going, where you don't have Tempest Djinn, it's very important to gain some more life in order to stay alive.
So Essence Scatter and Wizard's Retort will be good ways of holding off the exploration train for a little bit, but Gabriel Nassif here electing to go a little bit more aggressive than that. His Tempest Yin already a 4/4 flyer, and with each additional island that he plays, it will gain further points of power. And only 1 mana left up for Nassif here, so potentially enough to protect a creature. Cast Down comes, and there's a Dive Down on the other side of things. But the follow-up, this is...
Yeah, look at how big the Wild Growth Walker is going to be already. It's going to have 4 power, going to gain 6 life.
Jadelight Ranger, sorry, there we
go. Now puts a... Ooh, look at that. Perfect answer to Tempest Djinn. Although it is a little bit expensive, this mono blue deck, it runs 2 Spell Pierce, 4 Wizard's Retort, and 4 Dive Down. So a little bit hard. I'm kind of surprised that the Wild Growth Walker didn't attack there. It's a 4... What am I missing? Oh yeah, of course, with the Dive Down, the Tempest Djinn was too big anyway. It had 7 toughness. So good move there by Christopher Larsen.
Now, Nassif can quite happily get stuck in here. He knows that there's Vivian Reed on top of Christopher Larsen's deck, and in some respects, he wouldn't mind that one being played because he does have the Wizard's Retort ready, and it would mean that at least there's nothing else coming along here. Tempest Djinn holding back for now because it is essentially holding down a lot of attackers, just those Mistcloaked Heralds coming in, but Larsen's life total potentially going to be heading in the wrong direction with this line of play.
Yeah, now that the 3 toughness is gone, Dive Down has gone away. Christopher is free to attack with the Jadelight Ranger and the Wild Growth Walker. Let's see if Gabriel Nassif is happy to use his second copy of Dive Down in order to kill, for example, the Jadelight Ranger.
And it's kind of a low impact play for this mono blue tempo list. It would far rather use Dive Downs in order to prevent against removal spells, because obviously if there was a Vraska's Contempt or similar afterwards, then it would suck another removal spell out of counter spell out of Gabriel Nassif's hand, which is potentially kind of problematic.
And now
Thrashing Brontodon, so if there's an Essence Scatter in hand, this would be a fine target for it. I mean, maybe the 3/4 is just not that big a deal, but I don't feel like Gabriel Nassif can afford to let too many creatures down here.
Yeah, Thrashing Brontodon also handles Curious Obsession should Gabriel Nassif draw it. And there's a small chance that Christopher Larsen has a better play after this with only 2 mana up. So I do like countering. Yeah, you don't really want another 3/4 to hit the battlefield. This game is going to be a race, either way. Gabriel Nassif has to make sure he doesn't fall too far behind.
So I believe there's a couple of copies of Wizard's Retort in hand for Nassif at the moment. At present, though, no Wizards in play because I don't believe that the Mistcloaked Herald constitutes that status. And the Djinn certainly isn't a wizard. Mistcloaked Herald doing good work, though. The little blue lava axe that could. And Nassif here. An uphill struggle. His opponent's gained 9 life, and 29 is a much harder target than a regular 20 for this mono blue tempo list. It's not one that's prone to overkill too terribly often. Nassif carefully weighing up his options here. All right, 5 points of unblockable damage coming through for Nassif, getting Christopher Larsen to the dizzying lows of 19. And here's Vivian Reed. That one is good enough to meet a Wizard's Retort. But it does mean, of course, that there are going to be big attacks coming through.
Gabe is already
trades there.
Gabe is already at 9, still facing 5 damage. He's got to be careful. He does have the sleep. Can he actually race? He can take one more hit from the Wild Growth Walker, going down to 4. He deals now 6, 12. I think he can actually race. Not sure if keeping back the Mistcloak Herald is necessary here. Ooh, another removal spell for Christopher Larsen. It's gonna trade with Llanowar Elves, so takes 4. Yeah, this means he stays up to 5 life. So one more hit from Wild Growth Walker, still not enough. Let's see. Djinn
So
attacks for
now
6. He needs 3 more attacks.
And yeah, there has to be a Wizard's Retort on Vraska's Contempt there. Otherwise, he has no hope whatsoever. But any Explore here would be enough for Christopher Larsen to pick up this first game.
Yeah, I think he drew Vraska. Being able to destroy the Tempest Djinn should be enough as well. The sleep is not going to help Gabe there. It is going to delay him dying a little bit, but it's going to be need to be a very good couple of draws here for Gabe. Can he actually? At least he can wait with the sleep, because he did draw a Merfolk Trickster. But how is he going to win after that? He still has to deal 8 damage to Christopher Larsen.
And Larsen, of course, now has a Planeswalker on the battlefield, able to tick that one up. Anytime he's generating any sort of value, that obviously pretty convenient. And Vivian Reed as well. It's going to be a big struggle now for Gabriel Nassif on just 1 point of life to find a way out of this. Wild Growth Walker, the second one, just as lethal as the first, as is that Pirate. So much to deal with. Might as well do the opt.
Yeah,
And
he doesn't even bother with the sleep. He knows that he could not deal 6 damage.
So these guys, they're going to briskly move to their sideboards here. Christopher Larsen picking up the first game there relatively straightforwardly. The amount of life that he was able to gain off that Wild Growth Walker ultimately proving too much for Gabriel Nassif to overcome there.
Yeah, and now they are reaching for their sideboards.
Let's have a look at their decks on screen, actually, just so that we can see things super clearly here. So Christopher Larsen's list only has 2 Wild Growth Walker in the main, a couple more in the sideboard. Golden Demise seems like it might have potential here also. And Ritual of Soot, I believe, kills every single creature in Gabriel Nassif's deck, whether it has hexproof or not.
Yeah, Ritual of Soot is definitely coming in. I do also like Duress against the mono blue aggro decks, because most of their important spells are non-creatures. Well, of course, there's still Tempest Djinn, but taking Curious Obsession or clearing the way for example, a Ritual of Soot is very important. I like bringing out maybe some expensive Planeswalkers. I don't think Vraska Golgari Queen is that good. Although even that one still destroys a creature for 4 mana. It's actually very hard to figure out what to take out. I don't like find finality. I think that's the weakest card, and Vraska Relic Seeker is very expensive. 6 mana, runs into Spell Pierce, Wizard's Retort, Dive Down. So I think taking out Vraska's Relic Seeker and find finality for Golden Demise, Ritual of Suit, and a couple of Duress is where you want to be going.
And on the other side of things, let's have a little look at what Gabriel Nassif is working with here. So all blue all the time. There are a couple of artifacts in the sideboard, 1 Diamond Mare, 1 Sentinel Totem in there. He also has access to quite a lot of ways of bouncing creatures, though I'm not sure how much I am excited by that, given that so many of Chris Larsen's creatures have coming into play abilities. More interesting to me is the potential for just making small spot adjustments, maybe including a little bit of different counter magic, and Entrancing Melody might be interesting somewhere in the mix there. The extra sleep I'm interested by. It's something that if he gets creatures down early, it does help him out quite a bit in a race. But if he finds himself in a situation like he was in Game 1, then all of these sleeps really not doing anything for him. Really intrigued to hear your thoughts on sleep, especially in this matchup, Moraine.
Yeah, I think sleep is more for the mono-white matchups to tap down a lot of creatures. I think he's mainly looking at the Essence Scatter in his sideboard, maybe even taking out that 1 copy of sleep. I don't see much he wants to bring in. Entrancing Melody is fine, especially on a big Wild Growth Walker. Maybe the extra copy of Warkite Marauder, although that one's not even that good. It still dies to a lot of things. I think he's not going to sideboard all that much. His deck is kind of built pre-boarded against the black-green deck.
Lovely stuff. So we will find out how that goes. Of course, just the 20 lands in Gabriel Nassif's deck. He's very low to the ground in terms of how he's working. These guys just finishing their last bits and pieces. Just to let you know how things are going in the other matchup, it turns out that Etienne Busson is already a game up against Javier Dominguez. Busson on the red deck. Not too surprising to see that he's able to close out games quickly, but against a world champion, every game win has to feel pretty special.
Yeah, mono red against black green in our other semifinals. Javier Dominguez does have some main deck Wild Growth Walker and 2 more in the sideboard. So a little bit surprised by that first game win, but of course, I'm not sure. I think Etienne Busson was on the play. It can go very quickly with the mono red. Very streamlined deck, by the way. All 4 ofs, then 2 Rekindling Phoenix and 22 Mountains.
I can dig it. I like the aggressive red decks. I know there's a number of you guys watching at home that enjoy them. Also, hopefully we'll get a chance to see a little bit of that one. But for now, we're going to be sticking with this match between Hall of Famer Gabriel Nassif, who are 5th seed in this, and Christopher Larsen, who managed to make it in a clean-cut 8th place, and his Golgari mid-range deck picking up the first game against Gabriel Nassif in spite of him being on the draw. How important is it being on the play, do you think, for each of these decks in our semifinals?
Yeah, it's very important in this matchup. Getting ahead early, starting to attack as the first player. I mean, Gabriel Nassif wants to keep up 1 mana for Dive Down or Spell Pierce before he commits something like a Tempest Djinn. So having 1 land more is super important, especially as we've seen in Game 1. It was a race, as we saw.
So just to give you an idea of how everyone got here, Christopher Larsen, he beat Florian Trotter, the number 1 seed in his quarterfinal, while Gabriel Nassif was up against Alvaro Jimenez. Turns out that in both those matches, the lower seed ultimately getting through. And in fact, that's story true when we look at the bottom half of our bracket as well. Carlos Morale with his Jeskai control deck, losing to the quick beats that come from the red deck of Etienne Busson, and Javier Dominguez against Arne Huschenbeth. It was the green-black list that was ultimately victorious there. Intrigued to see how this GP ends up shaping people's preparation for the Pro Tour. It feels like there are quite a few decks that have the potential to be able to compete in this standard metagame. While the Golgari mid-range deck is certainly powerful, it is by no means the only choice that's able to compete in this metagame. And I think that's something that a lot of us are pretty excited about.
It seems like being on the draw is key here. So Christopher Larsen should easily win here, right? He is starting off with the Duress Charter Course, Essence Scatter, Opt, Spell Pierce, and Island, but no creatures. So I like taking the Charter Course because Gabriel Nassif doesn't have many creatures to deploy. It would have allowed him to draw 2 extra cards, so I think good decision here by Christopher.
Yeah, Charlicor's a card that seems almost ubiquitous in a lot of these blue decks now, just the most efficient way of getting 2 cards within blue. Sometimes you want to discard if you've got the likes of Arclight Phoenix, sometimes you want to play it after combat if you're a deck like Gabriel Nassif's, but either way around, a very efficient rate.
And Gabe is actually thinking about whether or not he wants to opt before attacking in case he draws a Curious Obsession. He could also keep up 2 mana for the Essence Scatter, but he did draw the Curious Obsession, and I imagine he's going to slam it down.
Oh yeah, I mean, in this matchup, you just have to get the damage in where you can, you have to draw the cards when you can, and that was a perfect sequence of draws here. And yeah, Merfolk Branchwalker, certainly good, but at least it's not a cast down or something that can immediately punish that play from Gabriel Nassif. Nassif will be able to get in a few good hits here with that Curious Obsession before he needs to worry about too much else, and with that extra card draw, this is the way that he potentially wins this game too.
Yeah, and Nassif, importantly, knows Christopher Larsen's deck list. He knows there's only 2 cards, 2 copies of Cast Down that handle his creature for 2 mana. There's no Assassin's Trophy, there's no Moment of Craving, so he knows he only had to be afraid of two cards. So well played there by Gabriel Nassif.
An opt from Nassif here. He's got a Spell Pierce in hand that Christopher Larsen knows about, and that would mean that the likes of Golden Demise or similar are going to have to be delayed a little bit. Christopher Larsen may want to try and bait out that removal, but another copy of Curious Obsession. I'm interested to see whether or not Nassif finds himself going all in on his one creature here, or maybe hopes to draw into another creature before he starts throwing down another Curious Obsession. You see Christopher Larsen there cast his Jade Light Ranger straight into the graveyard. He knows there's an Essence Scatter coming. He just needs to work his way through that various removal. And I like this. He's now got a 3/3 Siren Storm Tamer. That means that it's going to be safe from the likes of Golden Demise. And in addition, it will, of course, draw Gabriel Nassif 2 cards each and every time it hits Larsen. Larsen very much on the back foot in this game too.
And now Spell Pierce and Wizard's Retort up to counter the 2 next spells from Christopher Larsen. This is going to be a tough game to win. The 3/3 dealing a lot of damage, drawing 2 cards a turn. Vivian Reed, very expensive. Probably not going to be able to resolve against the likes of Spell Pierce. This card is not important. I'm pretty sure Gabe doesn't mind a Merfolk Branchwalker.
I mean, I think it says something about the quality of Merfolk Branchwalker in this format that in this exact situation, Christopher Larsen happy to put one in the bin on the Explore there. He has another one in hand that he casts. This one, Gabriel Nassif having a little bit more of a think about, but ultimately lets that one resolve too. So now there are a lot of Merfolk in play on both sides of the table as the Merfolk Trickster coming down end of turn for Nassif.
Yeah, even with the triple Branchwalker, he's not winning the race, Christopher. Well, in theory he is, but not if Gabriel Nassif is drawing 3 cards a turn. He should be able to find one more creature. The Merfolk Trickster can already jump in front of one of the Branchwalkers. So this is not the card you want to be countering. You would rather keep up that Wizard's Retort. Attacking here with the Trickster puts Christopher at 8, which is 1 attack less from the 3/3 Storm Tamer. But if Gabe doesn't attack with it, he has it on blocking duty, which also helps in the race.
5 lands, meaning a whole host of disruption potentially available to Nassif here. He's looking at these Mistcloaked Heralds, trying to figure out the best way of racing. Ultimately, he casts Charlicor's post-combat, finds himself a Tempest Yin. I don't think there's too much temptation to play it this turn. He knows that counter magic could be well employed, but in future turns, it's going to be another gigantic attacker, even if this Siren Storm Tamer somehow gets dealt with by Christopher Larsen.
Yeah, he does have the choice here of deploying a Mist-Cloaked Herald as another creature, or keeping up both Spell Pierce and Wizard's Retort. I think I like better keeping up 2 counter spells. You never know what's going to happen. Although Christopher has not played a single removal spell so far, there's a very low chance he actually has 2 of them in hand. So maybe playing the Merfolk is correct.
I like this attack before anything else from Christopher Larsen. He wants to try and get as much damage through as possible. And he gets a bit of information here about how future turns are going to go. Ultimately, Nassif electing to do a couple of trades there, and then this Ravenous Chupacabra will not resolve. Disdainful Stroke, the answer to that one, and that enough for Christopher Larsen to scoop up his cards. He does not want to see any more of this. All business, Larsen there, going straight on and trying to win a game 3 after a very tough game 2 for him. The games where this mono blue tempo list finds at least one copy of Curious Obsession, it's night and day between how they feel compared to the other ones. We're going to get a chance to jump across and see a little bit of our match between Etienne Busson and Javier Dominguez. 2 copies of Experimental Frenzy in play for Busson, who has just a crazy amount of lands in play, and that means that each and every turn he can be doing a lot, but those cards in hand he can't use. It's all about what's on top of his deck, and essentially he's going to be hoping to last as long as possible before he finds a land on top. The lands are kind of the big stopping point for big experimental treatment plays.
Yeah, Treasure Map does help get rid of extra copies of lands. So a nice little combo there for the mono red deck. What he really wants is a runaway Steamkin, because that one actually grows and grows and lets him play even more spells. This is like mono red's mid range. Kind of liking it a lot. Now triple Treasure Map. This is very hard for Javier Dominguez to stop. He will need to race as quick as possible. He needs that Wild Growth Walker to grow very big soon.
I mean, as things stand, in terms of actual threats on the board, Javier Dominguez is way out in front. He's got this Ravenous Chupacabra, he's got a Murfolk Branchwalker, he's got a Wild Growth Walker, he's got Vivian Reed on 6. There's a lot that Javier Dominguez can do in each of these turns. He just can't get away from the fact that ultimately Etienne Busson, with his Experimental Frenzies, is going to have a lot of velocity. He's going to be able to play a lot of cards each turn, and that means there is the potential for Busson to take his 1-0 win and turn that into a 2-0 victory comparatively quickly here.
Yeah, but Etienne is at 12, and there is 3, 4, 5, 6 power on the board. So, for example, Vraska's Contempt on the Firebrand does clear the way for 6 damage, and then Etienne has only 1 turn to come up with an answer. He should be able to find it though, because triple Treasure Map and double Experimental Frenzy, he probably will be able to find an answer. Vivian Reed could destroy one of the 2 Frenzies, but since there are 2, I don't think that's a good choice.
I mean, destroying an Experimental Frenzy at this point also says the cards in hand are all live. Realistically, there's a good chance that some proportion of those cards in hand are lands, given that they were the sort of the stopping point on the frenzy. I believe we got a sneaky peek at the draw for Etienne Busson last turn being a Phoenix. That one, obviously, he would be able to cast Rekindling Phoenix. For now, though, Javier Dominguez contenting himself to attack in here. His life total comparatively safe, one would assume, at 17. While the red deck does have reasonable amounts of reach, it does have burn in it, 17 seems like a stretch, even with all of the mana, all of the Experimental Frenzies, all of those treasure maps.
Yeah, now Etienne Busson is taking 3. He's going down to 9, facing still 6, probably 9, because Javier Dominguez is likely to play a Find Broker this turn. Maybe getting back the Vraska or the Memorial to Folly. I think Vraska is a little bit better target, because there are no more creatures in the graveyard anyway, and he also has the Find if there happen to come any creatures into the graveyard soon. Memorial Vraska also able to destroy any problematic permanents in the future. Unfortunately, no 4 mana left after this play.
Golgari Findbroker, just the greatest grave digger that's ever dug a grave. Doesn't just have to pick up creatures, big body as well. Every single time that you cast it, you're happy. I mean, even if it works out that you're not getting anything back from the graveyard, it's just a relatively efficient creature. And then when you're returning almost anything, puts you in fantastic shape.
I think Etienne has a Lightning Strike on top, waiting before his draw to play that one. A good play there by Etienne. If he draws the Lightning Strike, it will be stuck in his hand, but since he's still in the upkeep, he prefers drawing something different, making use of the Experimental Frenzy.
I must say, a little bit easier playing Experimental Frenzy on the likes of Magic Arena, where it literally it's just as if the top card of your deck is face up. As things stand, he has to have sneaky peeks each and every time, but now that there's a runaway Steamkin, no pun intended, Etienne Bousson could run away with this game as he's able to cast a lot of spells. It becomes much more difficult to run out of mana, and that's before we start thinking about all of these treasure maps.
Yeah, now Lava Coil, actually the perfect cards on top there for Etienne Bousson. This is what he needed. He needed removal to get rid of the creature. He's still at 9, only facing 5 at this point. Already has the Steamkin. I think runaway Steam win.
Potentially there, yeah. The Steamkin up to 3 now, and that means that these treasure maps, potentially one of these treasure maps could do more. And we've got a land off the top as well now. I mean, this is a different kind of red deck that we're seeing here, Moraine. Normally with our red decks, we think, well, in the early game, they've got a lot going, but we don't really think of them as being decks that have any substantial ability to compete in the late game. But Experimental Frenzy does change that equation somewhat.
Yeah, Experimental Frenzy adds a whole different dimension to these mono red decks, especially when compared with a card like Treasure Map. You get to dig so deep. You get to do something you don't usually do. You first pressure your opponent. If they are able to stem the bleeding, they stop you at a healthy 17 life. In the past, that would have been great against the mono red decks. You would have been very safe. But now we have this one card that actually can turn the games around. A very great card, and one that requires answers.
Now, Dominguez, of course, lots of cards to play with here. He is going to be looking to try and finish this game off before Bousson can leverage the huge mana advantage that he has going on here. All of those treasure maps, the copies of Experimental Frenzy that he's working with. 9 damage seems achievable in a couple of terms for this Golgari mid-range deck. And the fact that he's got Etienne Bousson at the life that he has means that it's a bit tricky for Bousson. He can't just focus all of his attention on sending burn to Dominguez head. He can't just go for the life total, knock that one down. He has to kill the creatures. So we're going to jump back to the other match that's just about to get off, because we know that these guys, this will definitely be a match that decides one of our finalists. And these guys playing comparatively quickly, it doesn't strike me as at all surprising if we're going to get a chance to look back on our match there between the world champion and the mono red player soon enough. Gabriel Nassif doesn't have a play on turn 1 beyond Opt. Turn 2, what can he do? Looks like he might be passing with Merfolk Trickster ready to go.
His hand seems a little bit weak to me. 2 Wizard's Retort, Opt, Trickster, and 3 Islands, so a little bit flooded there. But it seems like Christopher Larsen is stuck on 2 mana.
Missing land drops is one way to lose a game of Magic. It does not seem to be the way that Gabriel Nassif is going to lose, if he's going to lose this game at all. He's got 3 lands in play and the potential for a couple more already in hand. He also has counter magic for the next thing that's going to be coming from the other side of the table. Christopher Larsen, he's got a little bit of an edge in terms of what he has on board, but he may struggle if he's not able to resolve more key spells. Jadelight Ranger, that one, first we see an Opt. There's still a Wizard in play, meaning the Wizard's Retort still an option for Gabriel Nassif here. The Llanowar Elves very important to Larsen's plan in terms of being able to cast key spells. An attack for 3, there's a Swamp though. Christopher Larsen, only a momentary stumble on mana, and he is still able to keep things moving.
Yeah, now a dive down, but no creature to protect. Gabriel Nassif is not having the best of draws. I think he has that copy of Sleep in his hand as well, but pretty much like the first game, has no pressure to go with it. Cards like Sleep, Dive Down, they require creatures you want to be protecting. If you don't have Tempest Djinn, if you don't have Curious Obsession, these cards go down in value a lot.
Christopher Larsen here. He has the potential to play a Duress to clear a path, and then potentially a Ravenous Chupacabra afterward. Wizard's Retort being played on the Duress. Here's a Jadelight Ranger. That one resolves. Doom Whisperer going to the graveyard. Wild Growth Walker going to the graveyard. Jadelight Ranger, a 4/3, is going to be big enough to take some serious chunks out of Gabriel Nassif's life total.
Yeah, now Gabe on the back foot. He needs to draw a Djinn, and I do believe he did. That might be the one he was looking for. Now still has that dive down to protect it. If Christopher Larsen goes for a Chupacabra, the Jadelight Ranger can still attack though, so that one will put Gabriel Nassif down to 10 life. Gabe needs to draw Curious Obsession here.
And you can see exactly why the attack came first there for Christopher Larsen. He wanted to
Another Jin.
keep himself safe. 6 mana. He can play a Jin and still have mana up for all sorts of goodness here.
Attack for 6, play Jin, protected with dive down and then sleep. That's actually 6, 12, 18 damage. This was a good runner Jin for Gabe, but Christopher Larsen has both Fresca's Contempt and Chupacabra.
So basically Christopher Larsen setting up here for an end of turn Vraska's Contempt. If there's counter magic, untap, then play Ravenous Chupacabra, and one way or another have ways of dealing with this Tempest Jin.
Gabe is going for sleep. He's gonna... Yeah, well played here by Christopher Larsen. He saw that his Llanowar Elf was going to get tapped down, so he used it in response for 1 mana, but now only has 3. Can he find a 4th land? Oh, he can, and there, Ravenous Chupacabra, that swamp was crucial. Without the swamp, he was actually dead on board.
As things stand, Gabriel Nassif, he does have another copy of Tempest Jin. It's not all over, but it's much, much harder now. I believe that was a pickup of Wizard's Retort. So play a Tempest Jin. You've got counter magic for something that's coming from your opponent. But Christopher Larsen, he's the one with the wide board here. He can potentially swing through, get a little bit of damage in, and Gabriel Nassif, he's going to struggle unless he finds another Merfolk Trickster to get all of the damage that he needs in one fell swoop here.
Let's say Christopher Larsen, he can pretty much only attack with the Jade Light Ranger here. Puts Gabriel down to 6. Plays a creature, that one gets countered. Next turn, Gabe attacks with the Jin. He's actually attacking with everything? Oh, I'm a bit surprised there. Because he would only deal 4 damage. He would lose 2 of his creatures. And then not have lethal next turn. I think he can only attack with the Ranger, put Gabe at 6. And then next turn, if Gabe blocks the Ranger, he still takes 6, so then he's still less lethal. This is a tense game. I think Gabe should also counter the Threshing Brontodon.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's one of the decisions that Christopher Larsen is making is how likely is it that my Brontodon resolves? If I think that my Brontodon resolves, then this attack's great. If the Brontodon gets countered, though, and what's the chances that Gabe Nassif has a counter for a creature at this point, then all of a sudden this attack looking a little bit weaker.
Problem with this attack is that you don't have lethal next turn. You go down. Gabe goes down to 6. If you do this attack, I feel like you need to attack with the Llanowar Elves as well. Because I believe he has a forest to go with the Threshing Brontodon. But if you attack with the Llanowar Elves, then the Trickster jumps in front, takes 7, go to 3. This is a tough call to make. But now Gabe has an easy choice of countering the Threshing Brontodon. He kind of has to. Let's see what he can find. Island on top. He's probably going to play it, attack for 7. And then hope Christopher draws air.
This is about as close as it gets, ladies and gentlemen. Gabriel Nassif, I mean, he doesn't really need to play the island. It doesn't really change anything about the clock, and I think he'd much rather play poker than chess here. Hold a little bit of hidden information.
Well, the 1 damage might matter if he draws something like a Mist-Cloaked Herald. Should his Tempest Jin die, for example, but he does have a Charter Course in his deck, so that's a reason to keep the island in his hand. Like, if the Tempest Jin is dying, you're probably losing anyway.
And Nassif here, you can see that he understands the gravity of this situation as well. I mean, in terms of the things that could get drawn into by Larsen that could close this game out, there's any number of removal spells. He's not really got anything that can punch through more damage this very next turn. I guess find finality to... Oh no, even that, because it would give -4/-4 as well, wouldn't make a lot of difference. But there's the land on top. That means that Gabriel Nassif, ultimately the victor there. And you can see there, it's almost as if he'd been holding his breath for that last turn or two, taking a key breather there. And Christopher Larsen immediately on the phone, because I know that he has a flight to catch, and he's going to be desperately trying to work out how best to do so, whether or not that's a matter of him getting a quick taxi or what have you. But here we have our game still going on, our game 2 for Etienne Besson versus Javier Dominguez. Besson still with a lot of mana available and a lot going on with these experimental frenzies. Another Steamkin.
Mono red against mono blue in the finals.
2 treasure maps transformed thus far. And at
So
some
many
point,
cards.
actually getting rid of these experimental frenzies may be to Etienne Bousson's benefit. The life totals heavily skewed in Javier Dominguez's favor.
He actually has to start discarding.
Memorials of Folly will be useful in subsequent turns for Javier Dominguez. And yeah, one of these experimental frenzies getting sent away. This means that it's a little bit easier if at some point mid-turn Etienne Bousson wants to use the cards in hand for him to do so.
Another fight with fire. Yeah, he's got enough mana. He just needs to destroy the experimental frenzy to go for double fight with fire. I like the cyber plan. Treasure map and fight with fire after cyber. Fight with fire, important to kill Wild Growth Walker, because that one can get out of hand. And then treasure map to go with experimental frenzy, just so you win the late game. And we see the perfect example here.
Shock to begin there in terms of getting this runaway Steamkin up and moving. And is now the time to quit with the frenzy and just work on all of those cards in hand? It might well be. Okay, we are no longer in a frenzied state if we are Etienne Bisson. He does now have a colossal amount of cards in hand, and with runaway Steamkin, he could very well cast a lot of them here.
Probably has another copy of experimental frenzy in hand already anyway.
So Goblin Chainwheeler dealing another 1 to Javier Dominguez. Getting the attacks in here while the runaway Steamkin is a 4-4. And there's the handshake. Javier Dominguez does not fancy his chances there. And ultimately, we have our finalists. Only 2 colors going to be represented in our finals. It's going to be mono red on one side of things for Etienne Bousson. It's going to be mono blue for Gabriel Nassif, our French Hall of Famer. It is going to be quite the finals. Only 11 cards left in Etienne's deck, we're hearing there, as he was just being a card advantage machine in red. It doesn't seem fair, but it's exactly what Javier Dominguez had to face. The world champion not able to pick up another trophy in his first tournament back since those world championship, but we now have our finals. Gabriel Nassif, the French Hall of Famer, mono blue. Etienne Bousson, mono red. Do not go anywhere, folks. It is going to be an absolute barnstormer. And the one thing that I'm very happy to say as we're about to step out of the booth and we're going to get a chance to watch just like you guys at home is quite how great this standard format is looking. There seem to be a whole mess of great decks, and I'm very intrigued to see what that means for the end of this tournament and, of course, for the Pro Tour in Atlanta. Do not go anywhere. It'll be Riley and Simon with your finals after these messages.